the largest water user on the Colorado River.
You're continuing to use all the water.
And we had that right.
From water-intensive agriculture in Imperial Valley.
So we can agree there's a long way to go.
Long way to go. We've made good progress.
To a lack of water recycling in their biggest city. And why aren't they taking advantage of the ocean? We look at if California's water hogs are being wasteful with our most precious resource.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Kyle Payne. Nevada is a leader in saving water, especially as the Colorado River deals with drought. The largest water user on the river is California. This special will look at their water use and if they are doing enough or are water hogs. The Imperial Valley in Southern California is one of the major battlegrounds in the war over the Colorado River. Farmers there use about a quarter of that precious resource. That area has the most senior water rights along all 1,450 miles of the Colorado River, and they're not planning on loosening their grip on those rights anytime soon.
It's the law of the river.
The law of the river. According to this farmer in the Imperial Valley, the law of the river says the farmers come first, like it or not.
It's hurtful to hear that what we're doing is a waste of water and we're the problem.
The problem is far older than this fourth-generation farmer, Andrew Limegruber.
We've had this issue for longer than I've been alive.
Who seems like part gatekeeper.
If you look at our priority system, it was based on first in line, first in use.
And part politician.
You know, you made the comment that I sound like a politician. Well, it's because I've had to. As farmers, we have to wear many hats. I have to tell my story because there's no one else to tell it.
So he tells it like it is.
I hate where the conversation is led.
He's done many interviews like this one where he's portrayed as somewhat of a bad guy. He says no one ever mentions the good stuff, like how Imperial Valley farmers have, in the last 20 years, spent some $500 million on conversion systems and saved a total of just under 1 million acre-feet of water per year.
Roughly enough water to service 2.5 million homes.
We have drip systems, sprinkler systems, tailwater recovery systems.
He says farmers there have changed the orientation of the fields to conserve water, and that they've lined dirt ditches with cement and created reservoirs to catch water that would otherwise be lost.
Could you be conserving more?
Well, yeah, that's the question of the day, is can we be conserving more?
Robert Shuttler works for the Imperial Irrigation District. One of his jobs is to write the mission statement and vision for the district.
It's important for us to protect the river.
And to defend the farmers.
You're continuing to use all the water.
And we had that right.
That right even extends to the massive, overwhelming amount of water these farmers use to produce alfalfa, that leafy crop that feeds the cows and feeds you and me. And
a lot of the areas that farm along the Colorado River feed the nation.
But at what cost? It makes them big money and uses a ton of water. In comparison, an 8-minute shower uses 20 gallons of water, while one bale of alfalfa drinks up 650 gallons. But the farmers say they use all this water because the public demands it.
The real question is growing the food supply for the nation a beneficial use of water?
Beneficial use, the long-standing basic principle defining California water rights, which limits water use to what's, quote, reasonably required and prohibits waste.
That there's a new definition of what constitutes a beneficial use of water.
Bill Hazenkamp manages the Colorado River resources for Southern California's Metropolitan Water District.
Unfettered growing of alfalfa in the desert might not be a beneficial use.
It's not a beneficial use for me to plant thousands of acres of quinoa if there's not a market for it.
And even in the face of the river drying up and the highest temps and worst drought in centuries, the farmers aren't budging, particularly because if they can't farm, their livelihood will go down the drain.
Why would we solve a water crisis and then create a food crisis?
Some farming areas are dealing with the crisis in a different way. They're taking the government up on its offer to let fertile fields go unplanted in exchange for what amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a big thing here in Blythe, California, about 200 miles south of Las Vegas. You can see it's dusty and dry here, and economies in some areas that take the money also take a big hit, and that has everyone caught up in this war on water saying the F word.
For us, that's the F word in the valley, fallowing.
Fallowing is when farmland is allowed to lie idle during the growing season. The land basically stays bone dry because there's no reason to water it, thus preserving some of the Colorado River supply. But the choice to fallow is just that, a choice. When it comes to Colorado River water, the farmer's cup runneth over.
Without a change in legislation and change in law, we have to work with them to incentivize them to reduce.
So for now, until California and the other 6 states that rely on Colorado River water come to an agreement, the water in the desert will flood the fields. And to the chagrin of most southern Nevada, the alfalfa will flourish and continue to fatten up the food supply.
Nevada's been one of the most vocal places against the growing of alfalfa and farming in the desert in general. But I guarantee you, if you go to the Rio buffet right now and you look at their salad bar, that produce is grown right here. So it's a little hypocritical for them to call for the ending of farming in the desert and then to benefit off of the bounty it produces.
Southern Nevadans are hypocrites.
I must say he was a very good sport and was up for the debate, and I thought you, our viewers, would appreciate his candor. In a few places, they've been recycling water, even wastewater, for decades. Here in southern Nevada, they say every drop of water that hits a drain pipe gets recycled. In Los Angeles, that number is only 2%. But in California, they have more recycling options: stormwater, seawater, and yes, sewage water. The question is, are they recycling it or wasting it?
What these seagulls and ducks here in South LA probably don't know is the water on which they frolic and above which they fly fills this man-made lake in a park dedicated by a living legend.
Struggle for our community.
And Magic Johnson Park, named after the legendary LA Laker, has a pretty interesting lake of its own. Right here, alongside the playgrounds and walking trails, the scientists and engineers are using this intricate maze of machines to treat and reuse stormwater.
And then the water gets diverted here where it gets treated with ozone, alum, and chlorine.
What this all means is they're trapping stormwater that would otherwise be unused and reuse it to water the park.
Seems like a pittance.
A single park might seem like a pittance, but it's a step in the right direction.
Inevitably, the direction of the water recycling conversation leads somewhere some Californians aren't quite ready for.
And that's the idea of taking wastewater, treat it to high quality standards, safe enough for the public.
Jesus Gonzalez is the manager of recycled water policy for LA's Department of Water and Power, where there are 4 wastewater treatment plants serving some big commercial customers about 4 billion gallons of water a year. And their 20 to 30 year plans indicate that number should be considerably higher.
So we can agree there's a long way to go.
Long way to go. We've made good progress.
The conversation about water recycling has landed at the doorstep of many a courthouse, where legal battles have waged on for years. But what's going on here at the Santa Monica courthouse has nothing to do with the law. It's got everything to do with what lies beneath.
That's kind of the MO of our industry, is out of sight, out of mind.
Out of sight, definitely. Hidden here underneath this parking lot in downtown Santa Monica, where this first of its kind $96 million recycling plant leverages all sorts of water, including municipal wastewater, to make a drought-resilient supply, hoping to rely on their own recycled water and not Colorado River water. But when it comes to recycled wastewater, there's always the so-called toilet to tap. The ick factor.
Ick factor, it's gone away.
Gone away towards supplementing Mother Nature with technology, Wang says. That, and millions of gallons of recycled water every day. In the grand scheme of the massive drought along the Colorado River, though, 1 million gallons is barely a drop in the proverbial bucket.
You look at that as a small drop in the bucket, but if everybody does one, you keep adding that one up, it becomes a much larger number to help somebody.
Water has value even if it's wastewater.
Bill Hazenkamp is the manager of Colorado River Resources for the Metropolitan Water District, which provides water to 19 million Southern Californians. He says Southern Nevadans, who pride themselves on recycling almost 100% of their wastewater, have a leg up on California, because once sewer water or stormwater makes it to the Pacific Ocean, it's gone for good.
Unlike Las Vegas, where the wastewater flows back into Lake Mead, it's automatically recycled.
Recycled automatically or otherwise, Hazenkamp says, using the water twice or even 3 times is necessary because the water situation is dire, with Lake Powell and Lake Mead at their lowest levels ever.
It's bad.
It's really bad.
This is an overwhelming endeavor.
It's an overwhelming endeavor.
It's an endeavor the engineers at LA Water and Power are trying to solve, spending billions of dollars over the next 10 to 20 years on small projects like Magic Johnson Park and other much larger projects along the same lines. But it's not easy.
Do you think in our lifetimes we'll see this water problem solved?
Good one.
The MWD did tell 8 News Now that they're in the early stages of working on the largest single recycling of water project in the country. An ocean of water at their disposal.
And generally, California likes to protect their coastline, likes to protect their beaches.
Next in California water hogs with hundreds of miles of coastline, why isn't more being done with desalination plants? We will be right back. Welcome back to our special California Water Hogs. Saltwater and Southern Nevada. Not too often those words get uttered in the same breath. But for our neighbors just to the west in California, it's a different story. That coast is 840 miles long, but not too much of it is being used to solve the war over Colorado River water. In San Diego, 10%. In Los Angeles, the number is 0. It's most expensive, and California residents are not enthusiastic about disrupting their beaches and shorelines.
Growing up, drought was the way of life.
Having grown up in Las Vegas and spending her entire adult life in Southern California,
And then moved out to San Diego for college and been here since.
environmental engineer Michelle Peters knows the deal.
It's very complicated. I definitely understand the Nevada side more from the residential perspective, growing up there.
And as the technical compliance manager for the giant water treatment plant developer Poseidon, at this desalination plant in Carlsbad, right across the street from this magnificent beach where the deep blue Pacific seems to go on forever. Peters knows people in Las Vegas are tired of waiting for California to start using some of that beautiful ocean water to help alleviate the crisis on the Colorado River.
I understand a decent amount on each side.
The Carlsbad plant is an impressive network of pipes and potions, tubing, and tanks.
We're producing some of the highest quality, drought-proof water. We're providing 10% of the San Diego region's water supply here.
But getting a desalination plant funded, permitted, and past the scrutiny of the neighbors is not always a breeze. Just ask the people here in Huntington Beach, who have been battling for decades about putting one on this industrial site. That's never going to happen here. Huntington Beach is one of just a handful of proposed desalination sites in California. One day they're building, and one day they're not. In fact, there's only a dozen existing desal facilities in the entire state, which amounts to less than one desalination plant for every 3 million people in California. Getting the Carlsbad plant to where it is today was, well, no day at the beach, considering it took almost 20 years to get it permitted. It's a process they're very familiar with in the lovely oceanside city of Dana Point, where another engineer, the project's general manager, Rich Shintaku, is hoping the South Coast Water District's proposed desalination plant holds water.
Well, the project's going pretty well.
Pretty well, maybe. But you can hear the hesitation in Shintaku's voice. That's because, among other things, the area around Dana Point is vulnerable to earthquakes, and if the ground were to shake too much, it would rupture their pipeline, and the whole project would be sunk. This project cost $140 million just to get started, and they expect it to cost $6 million a year just to run the plant, if it comes to fruition as expected in 2028.
And that's why we need to provide a local drinking water solution.
Shintaku's been in the water business for 30 years. Early in his career, his job was to keep track of the Colorado River.
It's a very, very large problem, and that's an understatement, right?
Right, which is why Southern Nevadans want more results. But these desalination plants are expensive and a hard sell for most Californians.
And generally, California likes to protect their coastline, likes to protect their beaches.
Bill Hazenkamp is the manager of Colorado Resources for the Metropolitan Water District, which supplies water to some 19 million Southern Californians. He says between the high price of building these plants, getting Coastal Commission approval, and having to build unsightly plants on gorgeous waterfront real estate.
So desal's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not going to solve all the problems.
The officials we spoke with about desalination made sure to tell us that water reuse and recycling was a far less expensive, less controversial, and less time-consuming option than desalination. Still, in Los Angeles, for instance, only 2% of their water supply is recycled. To make sure you have enough water, you have to store it.
Yeah, we aren't building new dams, but we're retrofitting the dams to make sure that they can capture as much as possible.
Up next, we look at the dams and reservoirs in our neighborhoods to the west, and if they're doing enough to save water. There has been record rainfall in California this year. It would be nice to know that some of that storm water might alleviate the crisis on the Colorado River. But statewide, they haven't built a dam in California in around 40 years. We went in search of answers in California, but ended up way up in the mountains.
This captured stormwater made its way down from the tip top of these mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains in Los Angeles County, into this storage basin, and when it's time, it comes rushing and gushing through this opening in the 92-year-old Big Tujunga Dam, where the water flows from here and into an intricate network of spreading basins and floods out for municipal use in Los Angeles, a man-made marvel in the middle of Mother Nature.
They're still standing today and functioning as they were intended.
Sterling Clappel works for LA County as their head of stormwater engineering. You can see his whole face light up when he tells you his story about LA County's 14 major dams.
This is a story that a lot of people don't understand, but here it's been very visionary, going back to the 20s and 30s.
But that was then.
Yeah, we aren't building new dams, but we're retrofitting the dams to make sure that they can capture as much as possible.
The Big Canyon Reservoir behind me looks empty. It's not, it's just covered, protecting the water supply here in Corona del Mar, overlooking Newport Beach, California. But its appearance is emblematic of one of the knocks against what the state does or doesn't do to collect and store water.
Especially considering they haven't built a dam or reservoir here more or less in 40 years.
There's nowhere to build them. We got dams in the places that they need to be.
They say every major river in California is dammed.
So instead of new dams and reservoirs, California and its cities and towns are trying out other options, like storing water underground.
But we had to be creative in coming up with it rather than building new dams.
Bill Hazenkamp is the manager of Colorado River Resources for the Metropolitan Water District, which provides water to 19 million Southern Californians. He says storage needs vary in California depending on whether they're having a wet year or a dry year. 2023 is a wet year with double the normal rainfall. 2017 and 2019 were also wet, but 2018, 2020, 21, and 22 were all dry. In dry years, the MWD needs to tap into its stash like they did last year.
The years before that, Metropolitan added water to Lake Mead every year.
But all across California, the water storage game isn't going so well. Within the last month, the state's largest reservoirs are nearing their storage limit, and most are above the amount they historically store, an embarrassment of riches for the time being at least.
So what we need is that storage to carry water over from one wet year to the subsequent dry years.
That isn't an easy task, and faced with tough questions about Southern California being a villain in the war on Colorado River water.
So I think we have done a great job of changing that imagery across California and across the western states.
LA Department of Water and Sewer wanted to make sure we got the full story on how they do water, including water storage. Terrence McCarthy is LADWP's Manager of Water Resources Policy.
So I did want to convey all of the efforts we've made through the decades on water conservation.
McCarthy says in LA the demand for water hasn't changed, despite the population growing over 1 million people in the last 40 years.
We've been continuing to develop our local supplies ever since the 1970s.
The 1970s, right around the last time a major dam or reservoir was built in California. Dams like Big Tujunga, a goodie, even if it's an oldie.
We knew even back then that water was a precious commodity and water's life.
We'll be right back. One theme I heard throughout my visits to California is that water is life. All the states along the Colorado River acknowledge they will have to make changes to how they use water. That may include growing different crops in the desert, doing more water recycling, or even increasing the use of desalination. Thank you for watching. We will stay on top of any developments. Keep an eye on 8newsnow.com.